It was a typical Friday night, the kind where the week's exhaustion weighs heavy on your bones and all you want is to get home as quickly as possible. I was driving back from a late shift at work, the sky inked with the darkness of midnight. The highway stretched out before me, a monotonous ribbon of asphalt that seemed to go on forever. That's when I saw the sign shortcut to Willowbrook save 30 minutes. I'd never noticed that sign before, but the thought of saving 30 minutes was too tempting to resist. With a flick of the turn signal, I veered off the highway and onto the narrow road. Almost immediately, the familiar hum of the highway faded into the distance, replaced by the quiet, almost oppressive stillness of the night. The shortcut was a single-lane road, flanked by dense woods on either side. The trees formed a tunnel overhead, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. My headlights carved a path through the darkness, illuminating the way forward, but leaving everything else shrouded in shadow. The GPS on my phone lost its signal almost instantly, and the radio sputtered into static. I should have turned back then, but the road was so narrow, and there was no shoulder to pull off onto. I pressed on, my unease growing with each passing mile. The road was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. There were no other cars, no signs of civilization, just the endless stretch of blacktop and the oppressive darkness pressing in from all sides. After what felt like an eternity, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was gone. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I kept checking, I realized it wasn't just darkness swallowing the road. It was as if the road itself was disappearing, fading into the inky blackness like smoke. Panic clawed at my chest. I pressed the accelerator, willing the car to go faster, but the road ahead seemed to stretch on endlessly, while the road behind continued to vanish. My mind raced. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Was I dreaming? The trees loomed closer, their branches scraping against the sides of the car, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. My phone was dead, the signal long gone, and there was no way to call for help. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt just inches from the figure. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make out who or what it was. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, like something out of a black and white photograph. His face was obscured by shadows, but his eyes glinted with a cold, unnatural light. I rolled down the window a crack, my voice trembling as I called out, "Do you need help?" The man didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me with those unnerving eyes. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about him wasn't right. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, and I noticed that his feet didn't seem to touch the ground. I didn't wait to find out what he wanted. I slammed the car into reverse, but there was no road left to reverse onto. It was as if the world was collapsing around me, leaving me stranded in a small bubble of reality. The man continued to approach, and I had no choice but to drive forward, praying that the road would lead somewhere, anywhere but here. As I drove, the landscape around me began to change. The trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their bark resembling tortured faces frozen in silent screams. The sky turned a sickly shade of green, and the air grew thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. I felt like I was driving through a nightmare, a surreal landscape that defied all logic and reason. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time seemed to lose all meaning. My eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but fear kept me awake. The road never seemed to end, and I began to wonder if I was trapped in some kind of purgatory, doomed to drive this endless road forever. Just as I was about to give up hope, I saw a light in the distance. It was a small, dilapidated gas station, its neon sign flickering weakly. I pulled up to the pump, my hands shaking as I got out of the car. The air was stale and filled with the scent of decay. The windows of the gas station were covered in grime, and the door creaked ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the shelves were lined with ancient, rotting food. There was an old man behind the counter, his eyes milky white and unseeing. He turned his head in my direction, and I felt his gaze pierce through me. "Help me," I croaked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm lost." The old man didn't respond at first. He just stared at me with those vacant eyes. Then, slowly, he raised a bony finger and pointed to a door at the back of the store. I didn't want to go through that door, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run, but there was nowhere else to go. I pushed open the door and found myself in a narrow hallway lined with mirrors. My reflection stared back at me from every angle, distorted and twisted. As I walked, the reflections seemed to move on their own, their eyes following me with a malevolent gaze. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, each step echoing like a thunderclap in the silence. Finally, I reached the end of the hallway. There was a door, and beyond it, a blinding white light. I stepped through, and for a moment, I was blinded. When my vision cleared, I found myself back on the highway, my car parked neatly on the shoulder. The sun was rising, casting a warm, golden light over everything. The terror of the night before seemed like a distant memory, a bad dream. But when I looked at the rearview mirror, I saw a pair of cold, unnatural eyes staring back at me. To this day, I don't know what happened on that road, or if it was even real. All I know is that I'll never take a shortcut again. Some roads are meant to be left untraveled, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. It was supposed to be a relaxing night drive, a way to clear our minds after a hectic week. Claire and I had always enjoyed these late-night adventures, letting the road take us wherever it wanted. Little did we know, that night, the road had plans of its own. We were about an hour out of town when Claire spotted it. "Look at that," she exclaimed, pointing to a weathered sign partially hidden by overgrown vines. "Old Juniper Road." "I don't remember this road being here," I said, squinting at the sign. "Me neither," Claire agreed. "But look, it says there's a town up ahead. Want to check it out?" I hesitated, but the promise of a quaint, forgotten town was too intriguing to pass up. With a shrug, I turned onto Old Juniper Road. The road was narrow and winding, flanked by towering trees that blocked out the moonlight. The headlights cast long shadows that danced eerily on the asphalt. As we drove, I noticed the GPS on my phone had lost its signal. "Looks like we're off the grid," I said, half jokingly. Claire laughed, but there was an edge to it. "It's fine. We'll just drive a bit and turn back if it gets too creepy." After about 20 minutes, the trees began to thin, revealing the outlines of old buildings in the distance. "There it is," Claire said, excitement tinged with unease. The town looked like it had been plucked straight from a history book. The buildings were old, their facades cracked and weathered by time. We drove slowly down the main street, our headlights revealing signs for shops that hadn't been open in decades. A barber shop, a general store, a small diner, all frozen in time. "Wow, this place is like a ghost town," Claire whispered. We parked in front of the diner, its neon sign flickering weakly. "Let's take a look around," I suggested, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As we stepped out of the car, the silence was almost deafening. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive, unnatural quiet. We walked down the street, our footsteps echoing loudly. The air was thick and cold, despite it being a warm summer night. "Look," Claire said, pointing to a boarded-up building. The sign above the door read, "Juniper Town Hall." "Let's see if we can get inside," she said, her curiosity getting the better of her. The door creaked loudly as we pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Dust motes floated in the air, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. We wandered through the rooms, finding old furniture, papers strewn about, and photographs of people long gone. "This place is giving me the creeps," I admitted. "Yeah. Let's go back to the car," Claire agreed. As we stepped outside, we were hit with a gut-wrenching realization. The car was gone. Not just the car, the road we had come in on was no longer there. It was as if the town had swallowed everything whole. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. Claire grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to find a way out of here." We started running down the street, hoping to find another road or some sign of life. The buildings seemed to close in on us, their windows like eyes watching our every move. We ran until our legs ached and our breaths came in ragged gasps, but there was no end to the town, no escape. That's when we heard a low, mournful wailing, like the wind through a hollow shell. It seemed to come from all around us, growing louder and more insistent. Claire clung to my arm, her grip painfully tight. "What is that?" she whispered. "I don't know. But we need to keep moving," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. The wailing grew louder, and with it, shadows began to take shape around us. Figures materialized out of the darkness, their forms flickering like old film. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their faces twisted in expressions of sorrow and despair. "We need to get out of here," I shouted. But there was nowhere to go. The figures moved closer, their eyes empty and soulless. They reached out with ghostly hands, their touch cold and numbing. Claire screamed, and I tried to pull her away, but the figures were all around us, their mournful wails filling the air. I could feel their cold hands on me, pulling me down into the darkness. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, there was a blinding flash of light. I squeezed my eyes shut, and when I opened them again, we were standing on the side of the highway, our car parked neatly on the shoulder. The town, the figures, the wailing, it was all gone. We stood there for a moment, dazed and disoriented. "What just happened?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, my own voice barely more than a whisper. "But let's get out of here." We got back in the car and drove in silence, neither of us daring to look back. The road stretched out before us, normal and mundane, as if nothing had happened. But the memory of that night lingered, a dark shadow over our minds. We never spoke of it again, but sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the echoes of that wailing in my dreams. The spirits of Juniper Town may have let us go, but they left their mark on us, a reminder of the night we stumbled upon a road that should never have been found. It was supposed to be a simple drive home, another uneventful evening after a long day at the office. I had just left a late-night meeting and was eager to get back to my apartment. The sky was a deep, velvety black, dotted with stars, and the roads were mostly empty. I set my GPS, hoping it would guide me through the quickest route, as it always did. But tonight, the GPS had other plans. "Turn left in 500 feet," the mechanical voice instructed. I furrowed my brow. This wasn't the usual route home, but I trusted the GPS implicitly. I turned left as directed, and immediately, the road felt different. It was narrower, lined with ancient, gnarled trees that seemed to close in around me. As I continued driving, the GPS announced another turn. Turn right in 1 mile. The road began to twist and wind in ways I had never encountered before. I glanced at the screen. The map showed a road that wasn't there, an empty void where I was supposedly driving. A cold chill ran down my spine. "Must be a glitch," I muttered to myself, trying to ignore the growing unease. I turned right as instructed and found myself on an even narrower path. The trees seemed to grow denser, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a tunnel that swallowed the light from my headlights. The road behind me had disappeared into the inky blackness. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized there was no way to turn around. Recalculating, the GPS intoned, the screen flickering ominously. I continued driving, the road twisting and turning in a seemingly endless loop. The trees seemed to watch me, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out. The first vision appeared out of nowhere. A woman in a white dress stood by the side of the road, her hair hanging in limp strands over her face. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. "Do you need help?" I called out. But she didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. I inched the car forward, but as soon as my headlights moved past her, she vanished. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my forehead. "Just keep going," I told myself. "It's all in your head." But the visions didn't stop. As I continued driving, I saw more figures. A child holding a tattered teddy bear. A man with hollow eyes staring into the distance. A group of people standing in a circle, their faces obscured by shadows. Each time, they vanished as soon as I got close. My phone was useless, the GPS screen now showing nothing but static. I tried to call for help, but there was no signal. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized I was truly alone. The road kept curving back on itself, leading me in circles. Then the figures began to move. They would appear in my rearview mirror, only to disappear when I looked back. I could feel their eyes on me, their presence growing more oppressive with each passing moment. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to focus on the road, but the visions were relentless. In a moment of sheer terror, I saw a face pressed against the passenger side window, pale and ghostly. I swerved, narrowly avoiding a tree, and the face disappeared. My mind was unraveling, and I didn't know how much more I could take. Finally, I saw a light in the distance. Hope flared in my chest as I sped toward it, praying it was an exit, a way out of this nightmare. But as I drew closer, I realized it was a house, old and decrepit, with a single light burning in the window. I didn't want to stop, but something compelled me to. I pulled up to the house and got out of the car, my legs shaking. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the wind whispered through the trees like a mournful sigh. I approached the house, my heart pounding. The door creaked open, as if inviting me in. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The interior was dimly lit, filled with old, dusty furniture covered in cobwebs. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing eerily. There was no response. I walked through the house, each room revealing more disturbing sights. Old photographs of people long dead, their eyes seeming to follow me. Portraits with faces scratched out, and mirrors covered with dark cloth. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath forming in front of me. Then I reached a room at the back of the house. The door was ajar, and a soft, flickering light emanated from within. I pushed the door open and froze. The room was filled with more spectral figures, their faces twisted in anguish. In the center of the room was a large mirror, its surface cracked and dark. The figures turned to look at me, their eyes filled with sorrow and accusation. One of the figures stepped forward, a young boy with hollow eyes. He reached out a hand, and as he touched the mirror, it began to shimmer and change. I felt a strange compulsion to look, and as I did, the mirror showed me something that made my blood run cold. I saw myself, but not as I was now. It was a younger version of me, standing on a similar road, looking lost and terrified. I watched as I drove down the road, the same road I was on now, leading to the same house. The younger me was being guided by the same spectral figures, reliving the same nightmare. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a haunting, this was a cycle, an endless loop I was trapped in. The visions were echoes of my own past, my own fears and regrets manifesting in the most horrifying way. I stumbled back, the figures closing in around me. "No, this can't be happening," I whispered, but deep down, I knew it was the truth. I had been here before, and I would be here again, forever driving in circles, haunted by the ghosts of my past. The house began to dissolve around me, and I found myself back in the car, the road stretching out before me. The GPS flickered back to life, its screen showing the same endless loop. Turn left, it instructed, and I knew that there was no escape. I started the car and began to drive, the road vanishing behind me, the figures waiting for me up ahead. The cycle had begun again, and I was trapped in the endless turn, forever haunted by the echoes of the past. If you want to see more horror stories, please like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us, thank you, and see you in the next videos.